Now, you mentioned at the beginning of the book that you wanted none of the impenetrability that had come to characterize your later work.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yes. What do you mean by impenetrability, though?
Well, I mean, if something is about to be revealed, then I generally, my instinct is to move away from it and not quite reveal it. This was a case in which I was going to reveal something over and over and over again until you couldn't look away from it. I mean, it was just a whole different experience. The writing of it was a different experience.
And in avoiding impenetrability, did you feel yourself developing new techniques?
Well, no, because I thought this was a kind of one-time technique. It was, for example, there are no transitions. It's like a stream of consciousness. Just thoughts, any thought that came to mind, I just put down. Right. Now, quite often, I took, if the thought was wrong or obtrusive at that point, I would take it out that night. When I went over the pages, so it wasn't totally unedited or wasn't totally straight as it came out of my mind. But it certainly was to a greater degree than most things I write.
Do you feel, because there's so much in this book, so much more that stands revealed, and there's a place when you say that those people who used to ask John Gregory Dunn and I if we were competitive, there's something that they don't know about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, so much stands for so much more. It's such an extraordinary compacting of a 40-year marriage, so that it stands not only in the literature of grief, but in the literature of marriage. And I wondered, that always seemed to me to be a very private thing.
Well, I hadn't intended to write about the marriage at all. I mean, I don't mean that I had decided not to. I just mean that it wasn't. I thought I was going to write something about grief. But in fact, I was going through grief as I was writing it. And one of the things that you have to do in the course of mourning is you have to confront all of those memories which keep coming at you. And for the first 6 months certainly after John died, I had been unable to go through that, to face those things, because I couldn't afford to, because Quintana needed me. I mean, so all my adrenaline was going toward keeping totally away from any memory that might upset me. So at the point when I began writing the book, I realized that those things were coming back to mind. So I had to write them down.
Now, magical thinking, the first time I became aware of what you felt about it was in an article about South America, and you commented about magical realism, that you felt the political devastations in that continent had been so enormous that it was magical realism, a childlike response to a reality that could not be confronted. And I think you've never liked magical thinking.
Well, I mean, I certainly didn't dream that I would ever engage in it, but I certainly did.
What is it?
Well, I mean, it's, as anthropologists use it, it's the belief that you can control events through certain rituals or invocations or actions which are entirely superstitious in nature. for example, if you make a sacrifice, you'll have crops will come in. In my case, I realized that I was engaging in it when I just realized that I couldn't give away some of John's clothes because I thought he was going to need them. If I gave them away, he wouldn't come back. Well, then I realized that I was thinking he would come back. Well, I was thinking I could control events, which I couldn't. No one can. That was the big lesson.
Is writing an attempt of control of that sort?
Of course, writing is an attempt to control events. You can write yourself a pretty controlled little world.
Was it possible then to keep on writing?
Well, I had to. I mean, I didn't know any other way to organize the world. Now, it's probably folly to think you can organize the world too. It's like imagining that you have control over it. But to the extent that I could, to the extent that I could come to terms with it at all, it was going to be through writing it down.
Because it has always seemed to me true that the women who I think of immediately when I think of your work have to somehow learn not to organize their lives. You know, that lesson that Mariah learns, that nothing applies, seems to be, a defense against organization.
But they have to learn it over and over again. And I had never really learned it.
Knew it but not learned it?
Right. Mm-hmm.
When you discovered that you were writing a book, it does seem that this book has all kinds of abilities to order within it. Was that because it had become a literary project, and literary projects, if not life, can be organized?
I think that's right. I could organize, if I could organize the book, I could perilously organize my life, right? Or I could impose that order. I could borrow that order from my life. It was very important to me. For example, the ending of the book. I couldn't get that right because the traditional ending for this kind of book is some kind of resolution, right? But I hadn't come to any kind of resolution. The situation, as far as I was concerned, was not resolved. And so the first time I finished it, there was this kind of false resolution in the last 20 pages. And they were a mess, in fact. And then I set it aside for a couple of weeks after I had more or less finished it. I'd finished it with this false ending on the 31st of December that year, which had been my intention to do it all within the span of the year. But I put it aside for a few weeks and then rewrote it, and then found a way not to resolve it, but to somehow live with the lack of resolution. Which was useful to me.